In a town this big, who's there to write to anyway?
This is Gotham TV Podcast, the unofficial podcast of the upcoming TV show Gotham and the DC Connected Universe. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your other host, Derek. Welcome.
In episode 14 of Gotham TV Podcast, we will be taking a look at the news. We'll be also then finishing off our series on Gotham Central. That will be covering the final issues of Gotham Central and will be our Part 5 review. And we'll be looking further into the recent preview, The Legend Reborn, that was released for the iTunes Season Pass and on YouTube. And now on to the news.
Not a huge amount of news this week, unfortunately. We do know, again, to confirm, we're definitely getting Gotham on Channel 5 this autumn. Still don't have a confirmed date from them. One piece of news that we did pick up is that kind of a bad piece of news. We definitely aren't getting Gotham in Ireland on TV3. They've released their schedule for the autumn, and unfortunately they haven't picked up the rights to Gotham.
Yeah, we couldn't spot that at all, could we, on the schedule?
Yeah. So if they do have it, they're keeping it quiet, and it definitely won't be broadcast until 2015. So we're still holding out hope and crossing fingers for RTE2.
That's the other next best bet for the broadcaster for Gotham in Ireland would be RTE2, given their previous information up on their website.
Yeah. So as we mentioned last time, they have released their schedule for RTE1. RTE2 will release their schedule slightly later. We're expecting probably confirmation in the next week or so of the programming that's on RTE2. There's no reason why they won't be releasing it within the next couple of weeks. So hopefully they'll release it and confirm that we'll get broadcast at 23rd of September. That's what we're hoping on. So other than that, we just want to say thanks firstly to Sean Lunn, our friend on Twitter, and Batmanophilia, also a friend on Twitter, for pointing out a couple of articles that have come out in the last couple of weeks. I think these are kind of follow-up articles to Comic-Con and to the activity that was happening in the US with the Critics Association, where a lot of the major press are now getting some kind of main stories about Gotham. So.
Yeah, it's building towards the release dates and that this autumn.
Mm-hmm.
I think certainly for Sci-Fi Now magazine and SFX magazines, it kind of does suggest that these will be coming in autumn.
Mm-hmm.
To have these big features coming out on the magazines that are published and released in the UK and in Ireland, both digitally and obviously in hard copy. So it's ramping up that PR and the excitement for Gotham. It really is starting to sort of build and get people into the show and give them some snippets, because unlike ourselves, people may not have obviously been looking, talking, thinking, living, breathing the show since the end of February. So some of the stuff in there may appear old hat if you've been following the show and the background and the lead up and all San Diego Comic-Con and all that kind of stuff. But for many people, it's going to be new stuff. And I think even with that, there were some new aspects to these articles that were published.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know a lot of our listeners obviously have been with us since right at the start. I've been listening to a lot of the episodes. Not going to find a huge amount in the SFX article that we haven't talked about on our podcasts, but worth picking up. It's a short little piece. The Sci-Fi Now one that Sean Lunn and Batmanophilia pointed us to is a cover article, and it's the lead into a whole section about the superhero TV shows and superhero movies that are coming up. Really interesting kind of set of articles, but particularly the piece about Gotham. There's a couple of pieces revealed in there. One of the big pieces that I found really interesting was about David Massous and his casting as Bruce Wayne. That essentially Bruno Heller knew that he wanted a Bruce Wayne character. He knew that he wanted to kick off the show with Bruce Wayne. But when he cast David Massous, and with his experience on Touch, as we talked about before, the TV show that lasted for 2 seasons, that he found an actor that really can embody quite adult themes.
He basically felt that we can actually explore the younger Bruce Wayne much more fully, from a psychological point of view, from a maybe / disturbed point of view, much more thoroughly with the actor David Mazouz being cast. And so that was one of the interesting points from the article, was that they have actually included more footage, dialogue, and in a sense, screen time for the young Bruce Wayne because of the casting of David Mazouz. So that was really interesting. I think the other thing that the Sci-Fi Now article explored a bit more fully, it was mentioned in SFX, but it was this idea that the show was going to explore vigilantes. And actually, when we read this in SFX, we kind of thought, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that they're going to look at other caped heroes or vigilantes, that type of thing? We weren't entirely sure, and we were kind of thinking, does this mean that Batgirl is going to pop up? Like, there had been suggestions that might happen. So we were kind of slightly concerned there that this would be a bit odd. But Sci-Fi Now managed to clarify that, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. They've essentially said that there may be some people that some of the villain characters will look up to and kind of get some lessons from them and take them and then use them to kind of help them on their path to being a villain. And there's some characters that Bruce will take learnings from, and they could be other vigilantes, they could be other people that are taking the law into their own hands, very much is the concept of it. That's much more logical than the idea of Batman seeing another caped crusader in the city.
Exactly.
Putting on a cape, putting on a bat mask and going, well, I'm going to do exactly what he does. It seems much more logical when I read it in the Sci-Fi Now article. And I'm very glad I read the Sci-Fi Now article. When I read the SFX one, I definitely was kind of going, uh-oh, they're taking a bad turn here. But no, I think the clarification that I saw in Sci-Fi Now is definitely helpful. Totally understand if you think about the way I have it in my head. If you think about the whole relationship between Penguin and Fish Mooney as it's being set out right now, that's exactly what Bruno Heller was actually talking about. He's talking about a character like Penguin being a young character, being around a lot of criminality and going, ooh, I like what she did in Fish Mooney. And I like what other characters did, and I'm going to take that on board and do it better than they did it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's, as well, that idea that it's not from the pavement that he licked it, did Bruce Wayne. That,
taking my family motto.
Exactly. That it was, there are some suggestions in this world leading up whilst he's impressionable, whilst he's grieving for the loss of his parents, and as he moves, from a young boy into a teenager and eventually into adulthood, that Bruce Wayne is learning and being influenced by his environment and his surroundings, which would obviously as well include Alfred and Jim Gordon, but also potential vigilantes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we'll talk a lot more about some of the stuff that we've learned in The Legend Reborn when we're the trailer, when we're talking about that later on. One other cool thing I will mention about the Sci-Fi Now article, I do like their preview picture for Gotham, which is essentially a Batman comic book cover with Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock in there, saying that they're the heroes that Gotham deserves, which I like because it's a phrase taken from Dark Knight, which we spoke about a couple episodes ago. But I like the fact that they've put Harvey Bullock as a hero that Gotham deserves. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We don't know yet.
The only issue is that the actual magazine doesn't cost 20 cents. But other than that, it's great. It's a really good.
Like the picture, it's a really good image. Not a huge amount of other news. Anything else? Oh, I suppose the iTunes Pass that John mentioned in the intro.
That season pass is now available on iTunes for the series Gotham.
Yeah, for US and Canadian listeners, if you're not sure how you're going to be watching the show on your local TV station, if you don't have confirmation, you can go and buy it on iTunes for $29.99 in America, and I think it's $39.99 Canadian dollars.
Yeah, it's a bit more expensive potentially.
Yeah, don't quote me on that. It might be $49.99 in Canadian dollars. I don't know the conversion rate, unfortunately, but I did see it up there. So if you want to get your fix and want to make sure that you always have your episodes ready for you, iTunes is a good way to go for that. That's where they have the preview. I believe they have an on-set preview as well up there, which we can't see, obviously, being behind the paywall in iTunes, unfortunately. But let us know what you think. If you get to see it and there's something that we've missed out, let us know what you think.
So I think we can move on to some feedback that we got.
Yeah, we held a bit of feedback back for a couple of weeks. It was a conversation that we had with another one of our friends on Twitter, Elizabeth, who was asking some questions about the upcoming show, but also connecting it to Gotham Central. And I think now that we've gone past a lot of the arcs in Gotham Central at this stage, I think it's probably a good time to talk about it now, I suppose.
Yeah, so Elizabeth basically asks us any idea who holds the rights to Harvey Dent's usage within the TV show. I know it's sticky if they try to use Two-Face, but Harvey, a case could be made for bringing him in with Maroni now that he's on board. And this would set it up nicely for a Montoya arc. No? Question mark.
Mm-hmm.
And this basically comes from, certainly within Gotham Central, from what we've been reviewing, that Harvey Dent and Rene Montoya have a history, a backstory to themselves. I think, first off, there should be no issue with the rights to Harvey Dent and him appearing in Gotham, if the writers and the showrunners wish to do that.
Yeah, I suppose, as we've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast anyway, and we mentioned back to Elizabeth at the time that all the rights of all the DC characters are owned by Warner Brothers DC. It's one company. It's not like Marvel. There's no problems because Christopher Nolan used particular characters in his movie, or because particular characters are used in the animated series, or anything like that. They can use whatever characters they want to.
Yeah, particularly if it's right for the story. So in that sense, the flexibility available to Warner Brothers and DC is amazing in comparison to, say, Marvel, where they are having, and unfortunately are stuck in that position where we can't call them mutants, for example, and that type of thing. That's a shame, I think, for Marvel, personally. But
they're successful enough.
Exactly. But for DC, and Warner Brothers, they don't really have that same problem. They can utilize that, and hence why in Arrow, for example, they had Harley Quinn pop up very briefly, but they could do that, and they could tease that in a really light way, in a real small segment, like incredibly small, because there is no issue there. So there should be no issue to Harvey Dent being used if they so wished.
Absolutely, and I think that's the piece that we kind of talked about. Really, is just, they can do it if it makes sense. There's a really good, interesting relationship. If you've heard our podcasts on Gotham Central, there's a really interesting dynamic between Harvey Dent and Rene Montoya, particularly. We now know, since this original discussion that we had, we now know that Harvey Dent will probably feature in the show and will be around the same age as Jim Gordon in the show. I think the real thing that they've got to be careful of is, there's going to be backlash from fans. Obviously, we know that there already is backlash from just the title of the show and the fact there's no Batman in it. But some of this kind of stuff, we've got such a central character to the Batman universe as Harvey Dent. Now that Christopher Nolan took him and turned him into this contemporary of Bruce Wayne, the backlash now is going to be, well, you can't make him 15 years older than Bruce Wayne if you put him in the show. So they absolutely can use him, and I hope they do. It's a really interesting character.
I think the issue would be creating Two-Face too early.
Potentially, yeah.
I think.
Potentially.
That's not to say that they can't, and I think Elizabeth also kind of makes the point that they could actually do this, that there could be some clash with Maroni, like in The Dark Knight, but then Two-Face would almost have to go then into the periphery, and not really be seen, potentially.
Yeah.
And that may work, it might not do. I think for me, you could have Harvey Dent in this world. Two-Face, if he were to be created in this world, should be created towards the end of the run, I think, of hopefully the 10th season of this show. If you create him too early, I think that's a problem with the timeline, because then there's this guy running around. But alternatively, they could simply just lock him up in Arkham.
Yeah.
He could be arrested, locked up in Arkham. So we don't really know, but certainly it sounds to me it would be useful.
It's definitely plausible. I'd like to see Harvey Dent as the DA. I'd like to see him working as a working within the system, to have some kind of relationships with the characters before he becomes Two-Face. The whole point in The Dark Knight that they bring in is that he was the White Knight of Gotham. He was the one that was that everybody looked up to. You have time to create that over seasons. You have time to create that over years of the show like this, much before you have to do the turn him into Two-Face. You have time to corrupt his character in some sense. And that's what the show seems to be all about. It's about corrupting those characters from their beginnings to when they become the characters fully formed. But you're probably not going to see the fully formed version of the characters in the TV show. That's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that his call to arms is the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne. And that's what makes him take up and run for DA, for example. Yeah. And maybe then, actually what you see is something that has been hinted about with regards to Harvey Bullock, which is this slow kind of corruption and just this whittling away of the base character. But as opposed to Harvey Bullock, who maybe hits the bottle or maybe just deals with it and is kind of jaded, this tips an ethically and morally sort of all-encompassing person who thinks that the law is the be-all and end-all and should always be right, that this conflict tips him to a madness or something that affects him into turning into Two-Face.
Yeah, perhaps, absolutely. I think part of the question, part of the discussion from Elizabeth really is about the René Montoya and Harvey Dent relationship. I think that's part of our question. That's quite a central piece of Gotham Central comics that we're reading, and I know Elizabeth's read them as well. And I'd love to see that play out. I'd love to see at least a portion of that where they have some form of relationship where Harvey has a hold over her in some sense. I think that's quite an interesting little piece to play with. So hopefully, you never know, Elizabeth, and thanks for the feedback. Delighted to hear it.
Yeah, I think it would be a great dynamic on the show, a René Montoya and Harvey Dent dynamic. It would be great, absolutely. Definitely. So thanks very much for the feedback.
Excellent. And if you guys want to get us to send any kind of feedback in, you can get us on Twitter, you can get us on Facebook, Gotham TV Podcast in both places. You can also email us at gothamtvpodcast@gmail.com. We accept feedback from anywhere you want to send it in to us. We're getting close to the show launch. One of the kind of pieces I want to throw out to our listeners is really just how you think the format of the show is. We're coming up to the show starting. We want to get some feedback on our opening music, for example, and how the structure of the show is going with the news and with the actual show review itself. Let us know what you think. We're going to be going into doing a weekly podcast in hopefully a couple of weeks' time. So I would love to get some feedback on what you think. Just email us at the usual address. So we've had a little technical snafu. We had recorded our coverage of the Legend Reborn preview, and unfortunately we've lost it, but we're going to record it again and talk about it. It's one more thing that we just want to cover before we go into the Gotham Central review, our final one, which is a trailer that was released, or a preview that was released by Fox about Gotham, coming up to the last couple of weeks before Gotham's released on Fox in the US. They released a full preview, which is 21 minutes long. It's got 4 parts to it, split separately on YouTube, but you can also see it on iTunes. If you buy your season pass, they give you an additional behind-the-scenes preview on there. But myself and John just wanted to give you some impressions on it. I think there's going to be some spoilers, particularly for the first episode of the show. We've talked about a lot of these things in the past on our previous episodes, but there's some new stuff that's come into this footage. So if you want to skip it and go on to the Gotham Central Part 5 review, we think it's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes probably, so just skip ahead and we'll talk to you on the other side. So John, what do these encompass?
Yeah, so it's a 4-part preview special entitled The Legend Reborn. Part 1 is entitled Mythical Beginnings, Part 2, A City on the Edge, Part 3, Behind the Shadows, and Part 4, Heroes and Villains. And this covers most of the cast in film footage or in interview. Mm-hmm. It covers the showrunners, Bruno Heller and Danny Cannon, but it expands that to people behind the design and the look, visual effects and special effects. Yeah. And importantly, I think this is the first time we really get to hear Jeff Johns, the creative guy behind DC Entertainment and DC Comics, give his views, impressions and thoughts on elements of Gotham. as well.
Yeah, there's very much the feeling that if Bruno Heller has some questions about the DC universe and characters he can use, that he goes and talks to Jeff Johns, who's just got this encyclopedic knowledge about all of the characters that are involved, knows the history of them all, knows the future of them all, and knows what's happening. So it's very much using his knowledge to kind of bolster the show and turn it much more into the DC universe than Bruno Heller might necessarily have done.
Yeah, he's a great frame of reference for anyone involved in bringing DC comics or DC characters to life, and I think that's evident as well by his involvement in The Flash and Arrow, and most likely Constantine.
Yeah.
All these 4 TV shows coming out this autumn.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the few things then that we saw that were new here? And there are potentially 4 new characters that we saw. There was a lady in what appeared to be a club playing a guitar. It could be Fish Mooney's club. And she had an eye mask on, a bit like you kind of see in Arrow, actually. And there's a suggestion here that this could be the Magpie. There's speculation that she's the Magpie, who is a fairly minor character, also known as Margaret Pye.
Yeah, she's so minor. She's not even in our DC encyclopedia of all the comic book characters. So I presume she's either relatively new or has only had very small parts in TV shows, animated series perhaps. But yeah, a lot of people are speculating that she is the character Magpie. It's one quick scene, isn't it? It's only like
very quick. It's a series of quick flashes, and it kind of introduces very quick images of 4 new characters. In relation to this potential character, Magpie, the important thing to note is that she is a jewel thief. Like the bird itself, she likes shiny, sparkly stuff. And this might play well with the young Selena Kyle. It could be her mentor or someone who she follows and gets her ideas of becoming a thief. Yeah,
absolutely. The look also reminds me a little bit of Daryl Hannah from Blade Runner. The kind of mask across the face and just the makeup that she's wearing looks very like that kind of Blade Runner style, which kind of plays into something they say a little bit later on about the kind of style of the show and the style of New York, taking stuff from Blade Runner, taking stuff from that futuristic but past kind of look. But there's some other characters that are released.
Yeah,
so it's about 6 minutes 20 if you're looking at the trailers themselves. About 6 minutes 20 into the first
part, of the special preview. Yeah, one of the other ones is someone who we've mentioned before, and this is Oswald Cobblepot's mother, who's played here by Carol Kane, and we get a first full image of her as Gertrude Kappelput. So that's really good, and she looks immensely sort of a faded glory type of thing, a faded regalness about her, and very white hair. Almost looks like she's made of dust, very dusty, like she's in a library in a real sort of old house, sort of old money, I suppose, is how I would describe it, as opposed to some new money elements that we will talk about in a moment.
Yeah, but she looks like something that's been taken directly from Beetlejuice, one of a Tim Burton film. Anyway, she looks like just a weird character, just from the quick image that we've seen of her. But I do like the look. And
then we have 2 more characters that are shown very quickly. One is Frank Worley, who was in Pulp Fiction and also in the Doors films. And there's the suggestion here that he's in an evidence room or maybe a laboratory storeroom. But there's a lot of shelves about. You can't quite tell what's on them. Yeah. But there's a suggestion here that he could be a Mr. Freeze character or Hugo Strange, Dr. Hugo Strange, that's been hinted at for the series.
Yeah, I think once they put a name to a couple of the characters that they want to have on the show, and then showed an actor like Frank Wally, he's quite recognizable. He may not be in a lot of films, but he's definitely recognizable from something like Pulp Fiction. Once they show him, people start instantly doing those connections. The Hugo Strange character is definitely going to be in the show. We know that Arkham Asylum is going to appear. We know that Hugo Strange has quite a large involvement with Arkham, so it's quite possible, but we don't know yet. There's no other confirmation about him at all.
No. And then finally, there's an older chap, an older man, who is pointing a gun in a very indistinguishable kind of area. It could be the warehouse from sort of that butcher scene that we've seen in the trailers previously, or it could be at Arkham Asylum. We simply don't know. There's not enough context, I don't think, to this man who's pointing a gun. But again, there has been the suggestion that he could be a Mr. Freeze or a Hugo Strange character as well. Only time will tell in the case of these two characters who they might be, along with the potential Magpie.
Yeah. Not a huge amount else in the first preview. There is quite a good bit between James Gordon and Harvey Bullock that we haven't seen in the past, which I thought was quite interesting. Essentially talking about a bit about Harvey Bullock's character, that he expects little of the city of Gotham. He's kind of been worn down over time. He used to be a good guy, and now it's been worn down because of the dealings that he's had. Definitely shows some relationship between himself and Fish Mooney.
Definitely,
which kind of confirms that I think we'd seen the scene from another angle in previous trailers, and now you see that they're very close. They know each other very well.
I think we really get a lot of confirmation in the first part of this preview that Gotham is going to look at the origins of these supervillains, and that the jump-off point is this huge what if rookie detective Jim Gordon investigated the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and that everything kind of flows from there, that there is Ben McKenzie saying, he's playing this iconic law enforcement character in Jim Gordon, and he's a bit daunted, a little bit scared of it, but he's really thrilled doing it, and he's really enjoying putting his own stamp on that. So there's a lot of confirmation from different trailers and little sneak peeks from San Diego Comic-Con and the Television Critics Association nights that kind of all confirm what we've previously heard, which is good. Yeah. I think one of the really interesting things is Jada Pinkett Smith actually in this as well.
Yeah, I really love this clip. Just going to play it now.
Boy!
Sorry.
If you let this hair go frizzy, you will be.
Just really funny. I love the reaction to Oswald Cobblepot. Really good.
Yeah, she seems to be really enjoying playing this character, this new character for the show, Fish Mooney. From her interviews, from the fact that she carried a baseball bat around San Diego Comic-Con, to just the little sneak peeks that we're getting of her character. She's really enjoying it, and I love what she said, where this is a playground for her shadow, that maybe she's not done many villains, psychopaths before, and she's really enjoying sort of exploring that darker element in her acting. So that's really, really good to hear and to see in this. I think one of the other aspects that we get from part 2 as well is big confirmation of the Major Crimes Unit, the MCU, in the police department. Yeah,
and unfortunately they've kind of pulled down one of our theories, which we had said in the past, that the Major Crimes Unit is formed up of Jim Gordon, Harvey Bullock, Detective Renan Montoya, Detective Crispus Allen, and also Edward Nygma. They're actually all members of the GCPD. We know that for a fact now. But we know that Renan Montoya and Crispus Allen are members of the Major Crimes Unit. Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock are actually members of the Homicide Division within the GCPD.
And that makes sense, given that they're investigating Thomas and Martha's murder.
Absolutely.
And then we have Edward Nygma will be within the crime scene investigative unit as well, more the forensics. So they're not all together within the GCPD. And this might show some of the rivalries between these different units. We certainly get that flavour from Harvey Bullock's introduction of René Montoya and Crispus Allen in this little scene in the second part of this preview.
Well, if it isn't Montoya and Allen, Major Crimes Unit.
Any leads?
Just getting started.
I'll be straight. You want us to take it off your hands?
Come on, Bullock. You know you're scared of this case.
Yeah, and it seems really good. I love the attitude of Crispus Allen. It's really funny. Where it's just you fear this. Give us the case. It's really good. So another character introduced in part 2. We haven't really seen much of Erin Richards as Barbara Keene. Quite a big character, really. It's Jim's kind of anchor in the city of Gotham. He's moved to Gotham directly after coming back from the military. Barbara Keene is his fiancée in the show. We know that. It's now kind of confirmed that she's part of the upper upper echelon, I suppose, or the upper class of Gotham, which is something we definitely haven't seen in any of the previews. All we've seen really has been the police department and the criminality. But Bruce Wayne is obviously part of the upper echelon. I know he's a kid in this film, but there's always been that side of Gotham shown in all the previous films and all the comic books. There's always been the upper echelon of society, and now we know that Barbara Keene is part of that. So,
and is our way into that whole society in Gotham.
Exactly. There's also a great little scene between Rena Montoya and Barbara Keene, where she essentially is trying to protect Barbara from who she thinks Jim Gordon might be. Who she thinks he could also be another corrupt cop, and says there is a past history between the two of them, kind of confirming that that Rena Montoya character is similar to the character that we've seen in Gotham Central. So, if you've heard any of our past podcasts, you know our extreme like of Rena Montoya, and you know that you know a lot about this character, and I think it's pretty much confirmation that she's the character we believe she was.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to see, and it can only bode well if they even utilize a small fraction of what was in the Gotham Central comic series. Absolutely. For Rena Montoya, and indeed Crispus Allen, who again is another great character that developed in that comic series. Mm-hmm. I think as well we also do get to see the young Bruce Wayne more, certainly in a disturbed way. We see him trying to conquer his fear by standing on the top of Wayne Manor to overcome potentially his fear of heights here. But we also then see him doing, I suppose, self-harm by holding his hand above a candle, and you can see the burns on his palm. And this also allows us to see some more then of Sean Pertwee as Alfred. One of the aspects of him we see here is him arriving at the murder scene to obviously collect and comfort the young Bruce Wayne. Yeah.
We also see a bit of interplay between him and Jim Gordon. He is not happy with Jim Gordon trying to give advice to his young charge at all. I love that one little scene, one little line, which shows just that he is not happy. He's like, do you think I haven't told him that this isn't good for him? You know, very good. I'm really, really intrigued to see how the interaction between those two characters who are both former military, how they are trying to control Bruce and trying to guide Bruce through his life now that he's lost his parents.
And I think exactly. And I think Danny Cannon also indicates this relationship between Alfred and Bruce Wayne is kind of slightly peculiar. He's his guardian, but he's also his butler, his servant in a sense. And so it's to see how Alfred guides him to being a teenager, a young man, a young adult, which again is really interesting.
One of the pieces that came out during this preview is very much that Bruno Heller said that originally Bruce Wayne character was supposed to be kind of sidelined. He's a young actor. They didn't want to focus the show on him, but after the casting of David Massus, who was in touch for 2 seasons, after his casting, they pretty much said he's a great actor. They can actually take a lot of storylines that they probably wouldn't have given to another young actor and give them to David Massus, and he can play them up. So we're actually probably going to see a lot more of Bruce Wayne than they'd originally planned and than they'd originally shared back in September when they started production on the show.
And then I think finally one of the other great things we get from part 2 is Jeff Johns talking about this power vacuum being created and the tensions. He really focuses on this idea of tension at all levels and across the city of Gotham. And he talks about tensions between the Falcone and Maroni crime gangs, between Fish and the cops and the GCPD, between members of the MCU, such as Montoya and Crispus Allen, and the Homicide Division, Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock. So this will be really interesting to see. And I mean, there's even more tensions there that we know with regards to Fish Mooney and potentially with Oswald Cobblepot as well. Yeah. So this is a really great dramatic interplay, I think, that will be occurring within the show. Or that's my idea anyway. Yeah. And I'm kind of interested in this idea that is also put out there about this split between the Maroni and the Falcone families, the big crime families, because you get this sense from Fish Mooney that they're weakened, they're in a kind of enfeebled state as crime overlords or mobster bosses, and that this is her chance to come in and take over, but also whether this split between these two big crime families is related in part to the murder of the Waynes. I kind of suspect it might be.
Yeah,
but it'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. I have to say the one thing about this preview, I feel that it was something that's meant for the DVD or Blu-ray and has been turned into a preview shot for the show. I think it does give a lot away, particularly about the first episode of the show. But hopefully, if you don't want to be spoiled by that, you've skipped on ahead. So really, the next part that's in there is about the making of the show. Some of the pieces that have gone into making New York Gotham and making Gotham New York, I suppose. A lot of the stuff that's about Danny Cannon and how he wanted to do helicopter footage himself of the city and use that as their basic setup for the show and basic setup for the visual effects. He didn't want to take something of, I'm sure, the millions of pieces of footage that have been shot of New York through by helicopter. He wanted to actually record his own piece and then use visual effects on top of that to kind of enhance it. But they absolutely say that New York plays a huge part in the show, and that New York, without New York and without the city itself, Gotham would be a very different place.
Yeah, most definitely one of the big characters of this show has been cast in New York City. Mm-hmm. This idea that Gotham is New York City and New York City is Gotham. You kind of get this thread running through from Danny Cannon and Bruno Heller that they were using the New York City from the 1970s as a template for Gotham, this city that is vibrant, anarchic, crowded, and just getting crazier and crazier. They reference, as Derek had mentioned previously, this kind of film noir, classic film noirs such as Blade Runner to get that kind of dark tone, but also then films of Sidney Lumet and William Friedkin are also referenced. You know, this idea of increasing numbers of cops on the streets to deal with disobedience and disorder, the corruption throughout public life, and then also this anarchic look from graffiti, Gothic towers, gargoyles, all this being used by visual effects. And it's kind of interesting. I think it was Doug Craner, one of the designers for the show, talking that Danny Cannon likes to shoot in camera, this idea that it's the real shot going through and visual effects are placed within that, so you look like you're moving through Gothic towers and so on. So that's really interesting. And then even the cast, Ben McKenzie and Robin Lord Taylor, have said that the vibrancy of the city is infusing their performance and is influencing the production as well. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. Not a huge amount else really that jumped out to me from it. I think the creation of the set for the Gotham City precinct is pretty cool.
That's huge.
It's 2 stories tall. Took 10 weeks to build, and I think it looks like something directly out of Gotham Central. It's exactly the kind of central point for those comics.
It looks amazing,
and looks exactly like what I had in my head. They've released one shot, I think, of it outside of the preview, and I've had a look at it, and there's loads of little details and little Easter eggs for us to pore over when we start seeing the show.
Yeah, it's a really great looking set. Huge investment, and I suppose in a sense that shows the intention and of the showrunners to build such a great looking set. And again, it links into this notion that has been talked about by Bruno Heller and Danny Cannon about giving Gotham this timeless quality that on the one hand, yes, there may be cell phones, but the cars look like they're from the 70s, and some of the buildings look like they're from sort of 1930s Gothic sort of skyscrapers. So it's of its time, but also timeless as well. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, really, really, really good. And I think it's something that's not going to really sit side by side with Arrow or with Flash. It's something that's not going to be a contemporary city of those two. It looks like it could be something that happened 20 years ago, or something that happens right now in a city that hasn't invested a lot of money in updating its buildings or updating its setting, I suppose. But yeah, quite interesting. Not a huge amount from Part 4. I think Part 4 was actually something that we talked about in the past. It was just slightly recut for this full preview, but not a huge amount from that. Is there anything else that jumped out for you?
No, I think they were the main elements for me.
Actually, there was one line. One of the interesting things I thought was Jada Pinkett Smith calling Jim Gordon the White Knight of Gotham, which I thought was quite interesting, given that the last person that was given that title was Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, and we all know what happened to him. Is Jim
Exactly.
Gordon on a similar path or on a similar precipice? Will he take the same kind of path as Harvey Dent did or not?
Well,
Hopefully not.
no, I mean, I think we can definitely say that he won't, and I think what we will be looking at is why he chose to stay that side of the line and not descend into madness and vengefulness.
Yeah.
That he still wanted to protect the citizens and the people of Gotham and seek a better city.
And be the last good man in Gotham, as you said.
Exactly.
So,
But I think it's a really good preview, and so we would definitely say check it out, but just be careful in case you feel it maybe has too many spoilers for you for the first episode. But it's a great little addition to all the stuff that's been released by Fox and by Gotham. Yeah.
and with that, on to our Gotham Central review. I'm going to use the Harvey Bullock quote as the intro to Gotham Central, because those two characters, Renee Montoya and Crispus Allen, play a very large part in our Part 5 Gotham Central review.
Well, 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 if it isn't Montoya and Allen. Major Crimes Unit.
Any leads?
Just getting started.
I'll be straight. You want us to take it off your hands?
Come on, Bullock. You know you're scared of this case.
This is the Part 5 Gotham Central review, and this will cover issues 28 through to the final issue, issue 40, and it's going to cover 5 main story arcs: Keystone Cops, Nature, Dead Robin, Sunday Bloody Sunday, and Corrigan Part 2. And the main beats of these are 3 big 3 and 4 issue parts in Keystone Cops, Dead Robin and Corrigan Part 2, and single issue arcs in Nature and Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Essentially, we said last week that unfortunately we're kind of running out of time before Gotham, the TV show, starts. We're going to be covering a lot more issues in this than we've covered before, so I hope you guys are keeping up, and hopefully you've finished reading your Gotham Central books. We will be spoiling everything as we go through these. There's quite a lot of spoilers for Gotham, so it's good if you've read up this far. These are excellent issues, really. Really enjoyed reading through these, and some really emotional stuff that's happening with the characters that we're going to be watching on Gotham, and some really good storylines overall.
Yeah, it's a really fitting finale, I think, leading up to the final story arc, Corrigan Part 2, which has a real emotional weight to it, I think. Even more so, I think, than Half a Life, because of the people involved.
So I guess why don't we start at the beginning? Start off with Keystone Cops.
Keystone Cops, this encompasses Gotham Central issues 28 to 31. This was written by Greg Rucka. In this story, a officer is transformed into a burnt monster after an accident involving a underground chemistry lab, where he's rescuing 2 children in Montoya's old neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
The laboratory is an old Flash villain, Dr. Alchemy, and this results in Montoya and Crispus Allen heading off to Keystone City to investigate Dr. Alchemy to help save the injured and mutating cop.
Yeah, it's really really interesting idea for a storyline, I must say. I love the crossover. The crossover is probably the biggest crossover that they've done to date in Gotham Central. Having a crossover between the Keystone Police Department and the Gotham City PD, which I love. We've talked about before. Can we have crossovers in the TV show? And I love this idea where it's not minor characters of another city, but it's not the main hero or the main villain in a city crossing over. It's quite a small villain in Dr. Alchemy, and the cops of one city meeting the cops of another city, which is quite interesting. I like that. But going back to the start, I suppose, of the issue itself. So this kicks off in Renee Montoya's old neighborhood. Kicks off, I think about the 4th panel. You see, it's outside. 2 kids who are standing outside the grocery store of Montoya's father.
Yeah, Hernando. Yeah, it's all in that neighborhood, and essentially 2 children get bullied, get picked on, and then get chased down. The sister of the kid essentially runs to get help from 2 police officers. This is Officer Kelly and another officer, Officer Don. So they go down into this basement, and the kid that was getting picked on, they find him up on a counter, and the other kid named Jesus stuck to the floor in some kind of chemical, and they don't quite know what it is. Officer Kelly gets there first and manages to prise the kid out of this kind of gluey mixture on the floor, and essentially tells Jesus, jump. And as he jumps towards Officer Kelly, he knocks over another chemical in a jar, in a flask, which spills, and this entire basement erupts into flame, but not the flames of a regular fire. This is like there's no heat coming from the fire. There's no smoke. There's no fire rising up the walls and onto the ceiling. It's just the officer gets fried, essentially.
Yeah.
Officer Kelly.
Yeah, it's really, really kind of a sad moment in a way. Like it's the opening of the storyline. It's Kelly going in and being the hero cop. He's a hero cop on the beat, which we haven't seen much of in the series of Gotham Central. Generally, the cops on the beat are looked at as kind of the poorer relations to the major crimes unit. They're generally quite corrupt in a lot of storylines. This is a good cop who's gone to do his duties, tried to save. I think it's Miguel actually that he's tried to save from the bully. Saves both of them and ends off getting injured himself. And the rest of the story is as these chemicals start to take hold on him, he's not killed, he's fried. He doesn't die though, and he starts to mutate.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly going back as well to this, we know all these rivalries between different elements of the GCPD, and it's kind of the first instance of the patrol officers that you kind of get.
Yeah.
But you get this sense again that they are the poor relation to the MCU or to any other unit. But there is that moment where Montoya and some of Officer Kelly's colleagues, the patrol slobs, I think they're called at one point, where they want to get justice for Officer Kelly because of this accident and essentially what comes to be a crime, and because he's such a good cop. And they ask, are we on the same page? And Montoya delivers a really good line that says, we're on the same sentence, I'll help hold him down when we find him. So it's a moment of coming together of the different elements of the police department in Gotham, which up until now we've seen there's been a bit of a fractious rivalry between all the different types of units. There's almost like this hierarchy, this snobbery between them, depending on where they are. So it's a really interesting point of these issues.
Yeah, and it's essentially you take down a cop, you've got the whole department against you essentially. So yeah, really interesting. As I said, because it happens in Renee's neighborhood, she asks for the case to be given to her. It's a very protective moment of Renee. It shows her kind of her way of wanting to protect her area of the city, her local neighborhood, but also gives her the opportunity to go and confront her father, which I love. I think that's a really interesting scene. It's the first time the two characters have been together in over a year, I think, in the series of comic books. So it's an interesting scene when Renee goes and tries to talk to her dad about the relationship she has with Dee, and tries to see if his opinion has softened towards her from the end of the Half a Life arc, where he essentially shut her down and said, I don't want to see you again.
I think the other thing as well is that Montoya knew Officer Kelly, not from the police department, but growing up in that neighborhood. And it was actually, she got him started in the police, and to encourage him to become a police officer. So you get all this backstory of why she wants to investigate this case, and obviously, as Derek says, her father is around there, and this element of tentative steps at reconciliation, which initially seemed to be just brushed aside by her dad, Hernando. He doesn't speak to her. He just simply asks, are you still with that woman, Dee? She says yes, and they kind of leave in silence. There's no reconciliation, even though there are steps towards trying to achieve that by Montoya.
Yeah. I think one of the elements that they're starting to bring in now and really focus on over the course of all the rest of the chapters is how personally Montoya takes her role, takes her job at the GCPD. This is really the first one. We've seen some instances of it before where there was the incident with Corrigan where she beat him to a pulp outside Finnegan's bar, where you can tell she takes her job very seriously, takes her personal relationships extremely personally, if that makes sense. this is now her neighborhood is threatened, and her local friends, her family are threatened in the area, and this storyline is very much about Montoya and how she takes this job or this particular case very personally. When she asks for the case, Maggie Sawyer, the head of the GCPD, initially turns her down because she knows how personally Montoya takes these kind of things. She initially tells her, no, this isn't for you, there's another lead in this case, not you. I know it's in your local neighborhood, but you're not policing the local neighborhood. Eventually she gives in, but I think it's a good starting point for this whole arc of stories, really.
Yeah, it's a huge character development, I think, for Rennie Montoya. I think you kind of see her character as a cop and dealing with everything that goes on in Gotham, within the GCPD, with her external relationships. But this is one of the first times, certainly for me, it's not to say that there's no hints at it earlier, where you really get the sense that she internalizes an awful lot of what has happened in her life, from coming out to her parents, or being forced out to her parents, being forced out in the police department, the protection of her partner, Crispus Allen, from Corrigan by taking the bullet and essentially undermining the entire case against Corrigan. And she internalizes a lot of this, and what we'll find out as we just discussed through Keystone Cops is that, Dr. Alchemy also knows how to push her buttons.
Absolutely.
And this comes out that he baits her. He baits her all the time about her sexuality, about her partnership with Crispus Allen. And you can see that it doesn't get to Crispus Allen in the same way that it really affects Rennie Montoya.
Absolutely.
And coupled with the initial brush off by her father in his corner shop, where she's trying to kind of say, can we get back together? That initial brush off, I think, really sets in motion a change that gets noticed by Crispus Allen. This idea of her becoming almost more violent. Her expression is through violence. And it's what Dee also said in the previous issues that we looked at, where she says, sometimes I think you enjoy the violence of the job and this city. Yeah. It's not simply you having to put up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to the investigation itself. So as we said, it was the lab of Dr. Alchemy in Gotham, an old lab that he left behind before he was sent to prison in Keystone. So this leads for our ultimate crossover, as I mentioned, where Montoya and Allen get to fly to Keystone.
He's banged up in Iron Heights.
Yeah, and essentially Keystone's equivalent of Arkham Asylum by the looks of things. Just really interesting to kind of see this crossover. Really interesting to see these cops, and just a quick reference to the Flash at the time, Wally West. I like that little joke. It's essentially when they arrive at the airport and picked up by the two cops, they say to turn on the heater. Heater's not working. Why is that? West never seems to have time to fix this stuff.
Yeah,
he's the Flash. You should always have time. It's a nice little gag just to kind of bring in that, so we know the setup.
And you get the sense of the Flash being this personality and this figure within Keystone. They talk about picking up souvenirs from T-shirts, mugs, or whatever it might be of the Flash, because he's that kind of personality. He operates, I suppose, in daytime, and he's seen as less threatening. Keystone is obviously, the nicer of the two cities.
Absolutely. And I guess the bigger thing is he's also a superhero, which Gotham doesn't have. Gotham has Batman, who isn't seen as a superhero. He's seen as a vigilante for years. That's his role in the city, essentially. Whereas Flash is seen as this startling superhero that comes along and saves everybody's life. He's seen as a very different kind of character and held up as a poster boy for the city. I would doubt, even though the reference was made before about people coming to the city for this Batman souvenirs and tourists coming to the city for Batman, I doubt any of them actually want to stand in his presence, or many of them, unless they're slightly crazy. I doubt any of them want to actually stand in his presence. He's a scary character.
Exactly, and as Derek said, it's great crossover potential for the TV shows, if that were ever to be something that happens. I mean, to do with the crossover between the two police departments, but you could arguably say the crossover of Iron Heights and villains in Iron Heights to Gotham, and even villains in Arkham to Starling City in the case of the TV.
Mhm.
So it's a real indicator that crossovers between these different TV shows are definitely possible.
Yeah.
And they don't have to involve the main superhero or the main protagonist.
Absolutely. But yeah, I love the kind of interplay here. There's another kind of setup, and very specifically ripped from Silence of the Lambs, which I think is a real touch point for Greg Rucka when he's writing his stories. There's definitely a touch point there with Silence of the Lambs, because there's even a quid pro quo moment, or quid pro quo quote from Dr. Alchemy when he's trying to needle at Rena Montoya and Christmas Allen. He sees he's not getting very far with Christmas Allen, but he goes for the jugular.
Yeah.
Quite literally later on, but goes for the jugular with Rena Montoya. Starts to, as John has mentioned, starts to probe her, starts to get at her about her relationship with Dee, about her sexuality, but also about her aggression. And once he sees her reacting, then he starts to push it further on her aggression.
And he's pretty cerebral, he's slightly aloof, he's pretty arrogant. You know, he kind of starts to say, you need me, and otherwise I'm not playing ball. And there's the whole, the prison psychologist prior to them entering in, a bit like you have in Silence of the Lambs as well, as Derek says, where it's like, you know, make sure that you're not the one being manipulated by him, that you're the one controlling him, that you're the one sort of setting the agenda. And in a sense, that really falls apart for the two of them, because he knows he's in that win-win situation, because they have no other alternative, because he's there saying, I can save Officer Kelly and this mutation that he's going through after he's been exposed to his concoction of chemicals.
Yeah. And his proposal is that he travels to Gotham.
Yeah.
With them. So yeah, they get approval to take Dr. Alchemy out of this institution, take him to Gotham with them. And yeah, does he actually solve anything for them other than he goes to the hospital, he monitors the mutation of young Officer Kelly, who just, I love the art in these sections, because he actually looks like he's in serious pain. Actually, I laughed there, I didn't mean to laugh. He looks like he's in serious pain. His wife is absolutely disturbed by this change or metamorphosis that's going on. He starts to look a little bit like Clayface, the character from DC Comics. It's the way I was seeing it. He looks like his body's melting. He looks like he can change into anything.
And it's basically, he doesn't want to help at all.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to see the handiwork that his chemicals have done on this cop, and he's there to finish a plan. It's now the next phase, and he zaps Officer Kelly in the bed. He dissolves his cuffs in front of everyone. He also dissolves the necklace around Montoya's neck.
I told you, he went for the jugular.
Exactly. He changes all the composition of the metals. He zaps Officer Kelly, and then it's his escape, essentially.
Yeah.
This is his planned escape from Iron Heights.
There's just a couple of little touches within those scenes, though. So he's left Rena Montoya with a permanent scar of the dual female symbol, essentially, which is now permanent on her neck from now on, which I think is really interesting. So not only has she had to come out to everybody, now it's branded on her that she is a lesbian. There's nothing that can happen, nothing that can change. It's like as if Greg Rucka and Brubaker were setting this as being a permanent part of that character from now on. And the other piece is, did you know that the piece that he used to do all this is the Philosopher's Stone? That's what he apparently magics out of thin air to convert all these metals. So once again, the Philosopher's Stone, it's been used in many different mediums, but I suppose the one that most people remember is Harry Potter, which was called the Philosopher's Stone in America. And I think it's just been used as part of the brand new film that's out this week of As Above, So Below, as the central MacGuffin for the film. It's one of those ones that's it's kind of a catch-all MacGuffin that's used from many different mediums, but I think it was quite interesting that they used it here. It's even written in the lead into the next issue that is written that from Alan's point of view that Dr. Alchemy just magics this out of the air or finds it somewhere. Doesn't really know how it appears, but it's just used. So quite interesting.
Unfortunately, whilst this is all going on, Officer Kelly, who's now kind of awoken by the power of the Philosopher's Stone, he's been zapped by it. he's going crazy in the hospital room, and he kills his wife, who's by his side, and has been all the way through his pretty agonizing sort of ailment with all these burns and this mutation. And he kills his wife Sharon, which is a real sad event. The floor's knocked out. Crispus Allen falls through there. Renee Montoya is knocked, obviously now branded with the dual female symbol, and the Batman sort of appears to prevent Officer Kelly from escaping the hospital and Dr. Alchemy. But we then get to see this violence come out of Renee Montoya again, because as Batman stops Dr. Alchemy, Officer Kelly, now in his full mutated version, escapes from the hospital by jumping through the window and out the big hole that's been created in the side of the hospital. And Renee Montoya essentially finishes Batman's work on Dr. Alchemy, giving him a real big beatdown. And this is pretty violent.
Yeah, it's another brutal beatdown from Renee Montoya. I wouldn't like to meet her in a dark alley, whatever about Batman. My gosh, she's really has proven that she can take on anybody, and if you push her buttons hard enough, she's a strong opponent. Get the feeling that's going to be something that'll play out in Gotham, the TV show, as well.
After that, there's the hunt then for Officer Kelly, and he's not going rampaging through Gotham. He goes back to the neighborhood where it all happened. Yeah,
he doesn't seem too violent, really. It's kind of, he gets back to the local neighborhood. He's watching what's going on around him. He sees the kids that he's essentially saved, and it starts to come back to him what's happened to him. Unfortunately, because he's a huge monster, essentially to everybody around, a car starts beeping its horn at him. He picks up the car, crushes it, and throws it over his back. So it shows the mutation. It shows that he's now really strong, and now it
drives him mad, kind of angry, and starts crushing and destroying stuff.
Yeah, it's like he's suddenly twisted now.
This is across the airwaves as well, and Montoya suddenly is like, my dad. Yeah. And this is one of the other lovely little touches, is that despite everything that has happened between the two of them, because again, whilst Montoya was away in Keystone, her dad actually comes to her apartment to try and start reconciliation. And Montoya's not there, but he's brought in by Dee, and he stays for a few minutes. You don't find out what they've been talking about or what they chat about, but that's, again, both sides, unbeknownst to themselves, have made attempts at reconciliation. And now, in this moment where there is a meta-human, essentially, a mutant there, Montoya is driven to go and protect her dad and the safety of her dad, because it's happening right outside his corner shop. Yeah. And that brings them together, which is really nice, but has tragic consequences for Officer Kelly. Yeah. At the hands of his former partner, Officer Don, and Montoya.
Yeah, I must say, I do like that as the storyline it is. As I said earlier on, it's the hero cop that's been, he did nothing wrong here. The trap that was set wasn't something that was specifically laid for him. He just fell into it. He died at the hands of his partner, and everything that was set up it could have happened to anybody else. He just happens to be the one that was the center of it. His wife also died. It's a really tragic kind of story, but really, really well written, really well done.
Yeah,
I like that one.
It's a great one that explores further Montoya's character, particularly her emotional vulnerability and her internalization of problems, and that certainly plays out over the course of the remaining issues.
Yeah. So I guess on to next issue, on to Nature. So this is the one-off issue. It starts off the collected books, if you're looking at it. It starts off the collected book, Corrigan. It's a short story, really. They're starting to take the perspective of an individual character as they lead into each of these stories. So Nature starts off from the perspective of one of the corrupt cops on the beat in Gotham. This guy actually works with Corrigan, who we've seen before in one of the previous issues. But essentially, they murder a homeless girl at the beginning of the storyline.
Yeah, they're chasing down one of their informants. I think it's a drug bust that's gone badly, and they've chased him down, and they hear just within one of the dumpsters this noise, and it's a homeless girl who's kind of making her bed in the dumpster, and she's running away. They grab her, and in doing so, it breaks her neck.
Yeah.
And she's dead, and they just then phone it in as, look, we've just found this. They corroborate their stories because they want to make sure that it's just seen as them calling in a dead body found on the street rather than them being implicated. One of the first issues then, this is kind of the bad cop element. This is the reflective part of the previous Keystone Cops, where you had the good cops. These are most definitely the bad cops.
Absolutely.
And that you're introduced to kind of essentially their handler within the police department, just to show how corrupt the institution of the GCPD can be, it with the narcotics detective Kenzie.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I kind of love this way of thinking from these cops. They absolutely think they're untouchable. They think that Corrigan's getting away with this for years, and therefore they can also just get away with something like the murder of a homeless girl. Who cares about her in their heads? We're cops. She's nothing. We can get away with it. We'll just tell Corrigan about it, and he'll sort it out for us. Which generally is the case. He does sort it out. These cops do get away with the murder of the homeless girl.
Yeah, but there's a really delicious and botanical twist in this tale, and that is that it isn't the detectives from the MCU, because Rennie and Crispus are again assigned to. They have a pretty heavy workload. It seems they're obviously good because they're assigned to this case, but it's not the MCU. It's not members in the homicide unit. It's not the members from narcotics, from internal affairs. It's not other members or other units or other divisions in the GCPD. It is Poison Ivy who brings these two cops, these two police officers, to justice by essentially smothering them in tentacles of different plants and subsuming them into the grass, and they get incorporated into
Gotham City Park,
nature.
I guess. Yeah. Hence the title of the issue. Like, the one thing I do like, the way that Poison Ivy draws them out is essentially by giving them the opportunity to grow within the evil organizations or the corrupt side of Gotham. She gives them the opportunity to up their level, essentially, from being just cops that serve Corrigan to possibly being on his level, and they jump at the chance to kind of move up the ranks of the evil side of Gotham.
Yeah,
really.
Detective Kenzie comes at them with a proposal to do a trade. They say that they will do it. Corrigan helps to get the evidence from the locker in the police department. They go off to make the trade, and in fact, it ends up being a trap to trap them in the web of Poison Ivy.
Yeah. What do you think of this one? Like, this is a single issue. We've been pretty critical of some of the single issues in the past. What do you think of this one
I think this is one of the better ones, and I think it is certainly better as you move through the remaining issues. Again, I think actually from Keystone Cops, and even I think the few issues before that, they really tee up the remaining story arcs. In amongst all these arcs, even though it doesn't necessarily deal with Corrigan, it doesn't necessarily deal with corruption explicitly or centrally within the story, it's always there at the back, and it gradually gets ramped up. And in this issue, it very much focuses on the wider corruption within the police department.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes, everyone in the GCPD other than the MCU are on the take. That's it. It just feels like that, doesn't it?
And I think it serves to tee up and underpin the events that go on and happen in the Corrigan Part 2 arc, very much so. It also serves to introduce a quite central character for Corrigan Part 2 arc as well, and that's Detective Kenzie, and that's in Narcotics.
So it's a really good one, short one-off issue, and then we just kind of crack into the next arc. So this arc is called Dead Robin. This is the four-parter. We talked in the last episode, I think, about Lights Out, which was the single issue where Commissioner Akins takes down the bat signal. And we talked about the fact that we wanted to see some kind of implication from this. This directly leads from the fallout from that whole arc, essentially, is where Commissioner Akins outlawed masked vigilantes within Gotham. To protect himself from this, Batman has sent away all of his cohorts, all of the Bat family, essentially, to different cities. But essentially, it opens up with the image of dead Robin.
Yeah, it's a startling image of what appears to be Robin in an alleyway, dead on the floor. It looks like he has either missed his jump between two buildings, or that he was pushed, or that it's suicide. There's these different ideas going through and rippling through the police force. There's also the idea then of, well, is this actually the Boy Wonder? Yeah. Is this Robin? And if it is, if we actually investigate and root down into his identity, does that mean we're actually going to find out who Robin was? And this could have implications for the identity of Batman in terms of the associations that he may have had. And so this was a really interesting idea that if you give the police department long enough with the body and investigating him through forensics, through associations, that they could also uncover the identity of not only Robin, but the Batman as well. And I think these series of issues, 33 through to 36, is a really good investigation piece. Encompassing and utilising most members of the Major Crimes Unit, from Josie McDonald, Marcus Driver, Romy Chandler, and so on.
Yeah.
Again, with implications here, certainly for Marcus Driver and Romy Chandler, because of their partners being lost and their essential blame being put on the Batman and his actions.
Yeah, absolutely. I just to echo your sentiments, I do like the idea that this is the kind of the opposite way that most comic books take the masked vigilante idea. We've always seen it as, and been told through comics for years and years and years, you wear this to protect yourself from a bad guy taking out his retribution on your family and friends. But essentially, if you've been wearing a mask your whole life and something happens to you, who knows who you are? So the police don't have any idea if this is the real Robin or not. It's a really interesting idea, and something that I've not seen in any comic book before, taken from that side.
And the cops immediately on the scene have a really interesting cause of death for the Boy Wonder, cement poisoning.
I like that
which
line,
is essentially his head is caved in by hitting the cement, and this is a really good line.
I think I laughed out loud the minute I was reading it and said it straight to you. It's a good one.
But it's the other aspect of this as well, which is kind of, it brings it back to the reality of it, is this idea that, well, the Boy Wonder is a 16-year-old or less. He's a 15-year-old minor. And so by association, Batman would be responsible for his death because he is potentially his legal guardian in that sense, Bruce Wayne. Yeah. Not that they know this at the moment, but that there would be an element of blame on Batman because he partners with Batman. So,
it's something that's played out a couple of times within the Batman storylines in the past, where the guilt that he has for the death of Jason Todd, for example, or the death of some of the other Robins, is that essentially these are kids that he's talked into fighting alongside him, whether he knows it or not. He's convinced them to fight alongside them, and as they die or as they move on, he always has that guilt inside him. This is the extra guilt on top of the death of his parents that he couldn't stop. It's the extra guilt that always keeps heaping on top of Batman, is that he's got these children, essentially, that he's convinced to fight alongside him in really dangerous situations, and sometimes bad things happen to them, and he takes on that guilt as well.
There's an ensuing media frenzy, obviously, because Robin could be dead. Yeah. One of the vigilantes, one of the heroes, depending on which side of that line you stand, has apparently died, and so there's this huge media frenzy resulting. But what's happening as well is that there appears to be a leak from the police department as well, which, given the last few issues, looking at the corruption going on in the police, that doesn't appear that surprising. But the images are leaked, and in particular, there's that image of the Boy Wonder dead in the alleyway. And it's a great image as well. It's a great pain within the comic, with the rain coming down, and Robin just sort of spread on the cement, dead, with the cape and in his costume.
Yeah.
One of the crime scene photos is leaked to the press as well.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It's quite a cool concept. They got the investigation itself is really good, where they're trying to find out who the kid is and trying to find out whether even when they do find out who this kid who's been killed is, they still don't know whether it's Robin or not. His parents have no clue, but his parents start to get convinced by the media that it is Robin, or maybe it's one of many Robins that are out there and nobody knows. There's no indication. Yeah. I love in the background of the story of the investigation of Gotham Central unit. There is also the investigation of Batman, and they keep coming across it over the course of the issues. There's that great scene in Arkham Asylum where they go to investigate some of the villains, the major Batman villains. And Batman's already been there, where he's beaten each one of them individually to the pulp. I love the explanation from the guard in Arkham. It's like, seemed to have been a power cut for about half an hour. And when we turned the lights back on, we found them all beaten up, which is great.
Although, strangely, we do see Poison Ivy being held in Arkham as well, which, given that she was in the previous one-off nature, that seems a bit strange, and maybe that wasn't quite thought through as well as it could have been. Yeah. But you get the great line, because Crispus Allen and Renee Montoya are sent to Arkham to investigate whether all these villains are still actually in Arkham. Mm-hmm. And Crispus has that great line, it's not surprising we're coming to check whether they're still here, given Arkham's revolving door. Yeah. Like, it's really good sort of in-joke that, well, they come in, they seem to leave. They don't even escape, they leave. And so they go to check to make sure that all of Batman's old adversaries and villains are still locked up.
Yeah, and just see the little callback in there from with Harvey Dent, where he's in his cell going, Renee, come back, please, come back. Yeah. I love it. Just that little callback. He's been in prison since that time.
And that's a great touch. That's a really good touch. So these investigations ultimately ID the Boy Wonder. They ID him through the child registration program that's happened in Gotham as Roger Boundback. And as you said, his parents ultimately get convinced that he was Robin, the Boy Wonder, because he was doing gymnastic classes and all this, and he would be out doing them in the evening, late at night. So they think and get convinced that he was.
And I love, once again, another corruptible character in Gotham. The parents have just lost their son and then start selling their story to the media the following day. Is there anybody good in Gotham? I know Jim Gordon calls himself the last good man in Gotham in the Gotham trailer. But is he right? Is there no good people in Gotham? They're willing to sell their story the following morning, no problems. But, yeah.
But as well, Batman does make himself known to the detectives. And he says Robin's in Bloodhaven. This is not Robin. The police kind of still want to make sure that it isn't. They still want to do the investigation because of this sort of fractious relationship between Batman and the detectives. But he is telling them to stay out of this investigation, that he's looking into it. And of course, that would fire any detective up to kind of say, well, who do you think you are telling me not to do my job? And in particular, this goes for Romy Chandler, who lost her partner in the Soft Targets story arc to the Joker, where Batman saves the media reporter and TV presenter, the news presenter, and not her partner. So she's still hugely wound up and angry about this.
Yeah, and I love that it's herself and Marcus Driver who start to kind of work together on this. Marcus is trying to calm her down. He understands losing your partner. He tries to calm her down. The woman's not returning. She is absolutely convinced that this is Batman. They go to the Iceberg Lounge where they've gotten a tip-off that Oswald Cobblepot is back in town, and find Batman interrogating Oswald on the floor of his office. Basically, interrogating is a nice word for it. He's beating him to a pulp. On
Batman's
the ground.
gone to town on all of these villains and dubious people, like big time.
As I say, this is what I love. You know, you could absolutely see this from the other side in other issues of another comic book, but this is from the police perspective. They walk in on Batman beating up, essentially, Penguin's a criminal. Oswald Cobblepot's a criminal. But he is just a businessman in this world of Gotham. There's nothing been proven against him, and now they find him being beaten up by Batman. So how would that look to a cop who thinks Batman is the killer?
Exactly. To paraphrase Donal Logue as Harvey Bullock in the upcoming TV show, this is not a place for nice people, and including, like, Batman is not particularly a nice person. But in this instance, in the Iceberg Lounge, Romy Chandler draws her gun and fires at him. And this issue, the opening issue, is kind of bookended by Robin shown lying on the floor dead, and what would appear to be Batman dying at the end, being shot by Romy Chandler. Her vengeance, her revenge is actually sealed by shooting him, as he too is lying on the floor of the Iceberg Lounge, apparently dead.
Yeah, I love that. But yeah, obviously, Batman's dealt with guns many, many times before, and next issue starts up with and he's fine, essentially. But a great moment where you've got Oswald looking at him, kind of going, "Is he dead or not? I'm not too sure." He looks a little bit sad that he's dead, and then immediately pleads with the cops, going, "Well, if you need someone to be the eyewitness for this, I can say that whatever you want me to say." You know, it's the usual Oswald turning the situation to his advantage.
But Romy Chandler essentially gets a broken nose out of the deal, because he's not dead. He takes her gun and punches her in the nose, because she's fired the gun without due cause.
Yeah, a really good starting point.
I think as well, what these issues do is really investigate again this relationship between the police department, in particular the MCU, as I mentioned earlier, and the Batman. And they do it through Romy Chandler and Marcus Driver, where they have this real big heart-to-heart in the locker room, where Marcus Driver and Romy Chandler's kind of relationship or dislike for the Batman is explored further, to the point where Marcus Driver says, "I don't actually hate him. I could have done what he had done, which was to take down Mr. Freeze and get the justice that his partner deserved. But I've not held it in." And he's kind of there trying to counsel Romy Chandler, because she is holding in her hatred for the Batman, and that, in a sense, is corrupting her emotionally and giving her essentially bad judgment. But that's really interesting. And again, we get this underlying difference between Rennie and Crispus on the Batman as well, being played out over the course of these issues, where, for Rennie, Batman is almost an acquaintance. She knows him. She took up the badge because of him. She wanted also to protect her city. Whereas Crispus Allen sees him as part of that root cause as to why the city is going to the dogs, because to him, Batman is just a vigilante. And again, that's explored and carried through from previous issues, which I think is really interesting as well.
Definitely. As the investigation continues, so does the media frenzy, essentially, and another piece is published with another crime scene photo of dead Robin, and the second photo really pushes Detective Sawyer, or Captain Maggie Sawyer, over the edge, really. She wants to know where the leak is for these crime scene photographs and how they're getting into the newspaper. And
it starts to point towards Lippman, who we've seen previously, and he's the main Gotham Gazette reporter in all of these issues. And she starts to really focus in on him as, where are you getting these photos from? Who is your source? For Lippman, it becomes a real point of principle, because he doesn't want to, and for him it's unacceptable that Sawyer is asking him to give away his sources to her, so that she can arrest them and stop them from putting all these crime scene photos. But that's the main reason why Sawyer is so het up and angry about this, is because they are crime scene photos being put in to the press, not post forensics photos or even just after the event. These are crime scene photos,
actual evidence.
Yeah. She's so angry, she escorts him out because she is quite adamant now that he has no special privilege within the MCU, within Gotham Police Department, for information to put into his stories in the paper.
Yeah.
And she actually bars him at one point from one of the big press conferences that's had with the commissioner and with herself, describing what is the second body to emerge dressed in the Boy Wonder's outfit.
Yeah, yeah. In the meantime, Robin actually turns up, doesn't he? He comes back from Bloodhaven and goes and meets our friend Stacy on top of the roof. He comes to meet her and tell her that he's alive, essentially. That's all he's there for. Stacy says, come down and meet the Gotham City PD. They're the ones that need to know for definite that you're alive. And he goes, well, we have rules. Batman has rules. We don't meet the cops.
But she does also bring up the point that Batman's got Romy Chandler's gun, and what's happening sort of in the behind the scenes of all this turmoil of the Boy Wonder being apparently killed and all the media frenzy, and what's happening with Lippman and Sawyer is within the MCU, everyone else is aware that Romy Chandler fired without due cause. Mm-hmm. Her gun's gone missing, that this could really come down on her. Mm-hmm. And so Stacey kind of asks Robin the favour, could you tell Batman to bring the gun back? Yeah. So that she doesn't get into trouble. She hates him enough already, almost. And it's a really nice little scene. You almost see Stacey go a bit gooey-eyed for Robin, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a nice little scene that's played out. And it's played out again a bit later on when Robin does bring Romy Chandler's gun back from Batman. And he gives it to Stacey so that she can pass it on to Romy Chandler. But that becomes quite difficult for Stacey to do, because there's so much going on with all these dead Robins happening.
Yeah, it's a fun little background piece where you just see Stacey in the background kind of going, I've got something to tell you. Something like it's a really important thing. This could be the end of Romy Chandler's career, essentially, if they find out that she shot without due course. She's just completely ignored as a background character by all the rest of the Major Crimes Unit, because they're the Major Crimes Unit. It kind of indicates why all the other police officers hate them. They just seem to ignore everything that's going on around them unless they're talking to other detectives in the unit.
But within the investigation, then, the second body that's found, dressed in Robin's outfit, is pulled from the harbour. Mm-hmm. Again, there's more images released of that whole harbour area where the body was done before the press conferences and before the press have been told officially. MacDonald then thinks that she recognises the body immediately. And ultimately it comes to light that this guy is from an advertisement the Mighty Mints ad.
So I wanna ask you: is this a little callback for MacDonald's superpower, her power? That's why she recognizes dead Robin before anybody else does. That she has her little mind meld, as you call it, with Robin, and instantly recognizes who he is. Do you think?
It's difficult to know, because I think you'd like for that to be the case.
It's the intuition that she has. Isn't
it? I think that intuition, that psychic ability, you would like for that to be the case, because in some ways that whole issue of her being a psychic in the MCU and her telling her partner, Marcus Driver, hasn't been explicitly revealed. Yeah. It's just done at the end of that particular story arc, and then it's kind of dropped. And Josie MacDonald doesn't really feature heavily after that. In this case, she pops up, and I think you would like it to be that intuition, but because there's the Mighty Mint advert surrounding the explanation, you kind of think, well, it could be either. It could just be simply, well, I've seen that advert, it's on TV all the time, there's billboards all around Gotham, so that's why she knows.
Yeah.
But I like to think it would be the instinct that she has and the psychic ability.
Yeah. I just think it's an interesting touch, and you're right, it's not really brought up. There's another instance which I'll talk about in a little while, but yeah, it's not really brought up again. Unfortunately, we talked about it hoping that it was going to be brought up, but unfortunately, it wasn't. So I suppose kind of to crack on with the story itself, it's quite an interesting idea. When they kind of complete their investigation as they move into accusing one of the reporters,
colleague of Lippman's, Dunning. Ultimately, what happens is that there's a third kid going missing, because they start to link it to the talent agency that the second boy who was found murdered in the harbour, he had gone through a talent agency, and so they start to look through all their clients, and they come up with this third kid who's missing, Zach Weston. In the meantime, Crispus Allen essentially sees a huge difference between what was leaked to the press and what was on the front cover of the Gotham Gazette and the crime scene photos. And it ends up that they're not crime scene photos, that actually they were taken before the police ever arrived.
Yeah. So I love this exploration here. So it's essentially one of the press, Dunning, is the perpetrator of the crime. And it's because he wants to become he wants to stop being a reporter and stop watching from the outskirts, wants to be part of Batman's world, wants to become a supervillain of Batman. And he's kind of pleading with Batman, saying when Batman eventually catches up to him, which again, I wouldn't want to be in that position,
No.
but when he eventually catches up with Batman, he's kind of going, I did it, now I'm one of your rogues gallery, I'm now one of your villains. He's so pleading to be included and pleading to be part of the real Gotham.
And he will only speak to Batman after he's been brought in to be questioned. And of course, Batman comes in and essentially scares the living daylights out of him with, again, a pretty violent approach to his questioning and interrogation style. Very reminiscent, I think, throughout this whole story arc to Christian Bale's interrogation of the Joker in The Dark Knight.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do like this. It's a callback to that question that always comes up of, would there be costume freaks? Would there be freaks in the city, as the GCPD call them, without Batman? And this is essentially, Dunning has been created as a supervillain from being a bystander and a watcher all the way through his career. He's been created as a villain because of the presence of Batman. And once again, that argument is coming back up and just seen from a different angle, you know. I really like what Brubaker and Rooker have done here in their look at this framing of a bad guy and how the creation of a bad guy. It's quite good, and it's something that you're probably going to see quite a lot in Gotham in the TV show, and how these people are created by their surroundings. Obviously, Batman's not there, but there are other surroundings within Gotham that are going to force some criminals out that may not have happened in any other city.
Exactly. But the investigation is closed. They realize Robin is still alive. They get Zach Weston, this third kid who's missing. They get him back, and Dunning obviously is sent off to prison. And in the meantime, Romy Chandler also gets her firearm back, although it's a very close call. But Captain Sawyer, is willing to accept the explanation as Stacy finally manages to get the gun into Romy's hands.
Yeah, really good. Really good arc overall. I must say this is one of my favorites. I totally know what Brubaker and Rooker were trying to do in creating completely separate parts of the MCU, showing it's a 24-hour-a-day unit essentially. But I love this kind of crossover internally between all these characters. It's great to see them all working together and
bringing them all together, like they did with Soft Targets as well. It's it's a family piece almost of the MCU, all working together on a really big case. And there's nothing bigger than apparently one of the main characters, in this case Robin, appearing to be dead.
Yeah, no, really, really good one.
But then we come into another single issue story, Sunday, Bloody Sunday.
Maybe it's because I'm Irish. I just have you two in my head every time.
Well, that's the same for me. So this once-off single issue story, Sunday, Bloody Sunday, is a crossover with the events that are occurring in the Infinite Crisis story. And it's melded together with an exploration of Crispus Allen and his motives as a detective and his relationships both professionally with Renee Montoya and also with his family, his wife and his two children.
Yeah.
And I really like the delve into Crispus Allen, but unfortunately it has this crossover that seems to be just thrown in. It's just odd. It doesn't fit with what the writers are trying to do here, and I don't think that's their fault. I think it's the fact that they have to incorporate this crossover, this tie-in, and it just doesn't make much sense, because it doesn't pop up again in any of the remaining issues. It doesn't really fully fit in with the story, only in the fact that you get to hear that Crispus Allen doesn't believe in God. His wife does, and that's a source of tension between the two, and that all of a sudden this cosmic event is occurring that involves the Spectre, who's gone mad and is unraveling all the magic. It's creating a sort of a divine vengeance, and there's, the Rock of Eternity is shattered, the 7 deadly sins are free upon Gotham, Captain Marvel has come down, and he kind of sees that, or maybe there is something other than just simply science or this earth, that there are divine beings, maybe.
Yeah.
Or magic or supernatural elements that are all coming and filtering in to Gotham at this moment and looking to destroy it. But it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird crossover. I've never read Infinite Crisis. Apologies to those of you who have. I know it's one of those ones that's kind of on my reading list, definitely, but it's taking one issue out of what was, I don't know how many issues were involved in that crossover, but I think it's every single comic that was alive at the time in the regular DC universe. Picking up one of those issues and reading it front to back, I think they did the best they possibly could with the kind of framing device of Infinite Crisis. By doing it from the perspective of Crispus Allen, a man, whose family essentially believe in God. He's a very central family man. I like what they did with it. It takes a look at Crispus as being the protector or the shield for his family from Gotham. The one thing he wants to do in the middle of this huge crisis is to get back to his family. I like that framing device. I like what they did with what they had to use and what elements they had to use, but it doesn't feel congruous with the rest of Gotham Central. It feels completely incongruous, was about the only other word I have for it.
Exactly. It's of a different story, and it feels that.
Really does, yeah.
And especially in comparison to the whole narration of Crispus about his motives of doing the job. Again, we're thrown back to essentially his concern that Renee Montoya, since Two-Face, is beginning to enjoy the violence of the job, and that her only outlet, her only ability to let off steam and her feelings is through violence, that it's no longer simply through being able to talk to one another and to talk through the issues that she has.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I do like just a little bit. Crispus Allen is having a bad day. I know the story's told from his perspective, and everybody's bad day is worse than your bad day, I suppose. But Crispus has a bad day. Renee gets possessed by one of the 7 deadly sins, which turns out to be vengeance or anger, I think it is. So she tries to kill Crispus Allen. Shazam steps in. Captain Marvel steps in and releases the spirit of vengeance, I suppose. The Fisherman, a bad villain of Aquaman, apparently, who even Crispus Allen comments, I'd laugh at him in normal circumstances. He also tries to kill Detective Allen. It's a bad day for him, isn't it? In the middle of all this crisis, in the middle of everything that's going on. But I like the little touch where it essentially goes to Shazam, who turns around to Crispus and says, well, I'm going off to protect my family, and runs away. And Alan goes, well, if he's scared about his family and he's Shazam, what the heck chance do my family have? And it sets him on the path to go to help
find
his family.
Yeah, exactly. Find his family. I mean, I think for me, what Sunday Bloody Sunday does is really explore Crispus further, and it's the first real time that we've gotten to see that, where that relationship with his wife and his kids are brought out more. You get a sense of starting to know Crispus Allen. And I think really this is done from a story perspective in relation to then the final arc of Gotham Central, issues 38 to 40, Corrigan Part 2. Because you really start to bring in this idea that you maybe understand and know Crispus, because up till then you kind of just think that he's a bit of a standoffish kind of person. You know, he'll throw out a one-liner. If he doesn't like you, he will tell you, and you feel pretty bad, and you don't necessarily want to be anywhere near him.
Yep.
If he's loyal to you, he'll stick with you. You know, you start to find out what makes him tick, and that's important, I think, for Corrigan Part 2.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think the idea that's definitely borne out here is that Crispus very much has the same opinion of his wife as he does of Rene. There's obviously no sexual side of it with Rene, but it's very much he treats both of them as his partners, and both of them are as important in his life as each other, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which I think is hugely important. Setting up the arc of Corrigan, part 2.
This final story arc, Corrigan Part 2, obviously links back to the initial story arc, Corrigan. And it links back to the fact that the internal affairs case against Corrigan as a corrupt cop was undermined by Rennie looking out for her partner, Crispus Allen.
Yeah.
And since then, there has been the suggestion that Crispus Allen knows something went on. And up till this point, he has no knowledge of what happened between Esperanza and Rennie Montoya.
And their arrangement, wasn't it?
But he doesn't know until now. And this trade-off to save his badge doesn't really sit well with Crispus, ultimately. And so he's starting to investigate Corrigan on his own.
Yeah. In the meantime, Rene is starting to really kind of spiral out of control. All the comments that people have made over the last couple of years seem to be really getting to her. The idea that her aggression is starting to take over is really coming to light. She's starting to drink really late into the night, getting drunk in bars, cheating on Dee, her girlfriend, starting bar fights at the drop of a hat. It's really powerful kind of scenes that are going on with Rene.
Yeah, and these scenes are really done very well. And it's a split page with panels. On one side, it's looking at Rennie Montoya, as you say, in the bars, getting drunk, cheating on a girlfriend. And then on the other side, you have Crispus Allen, who's out investigating Corrigan, and following Detective Kenzie from Narcotics, who we saw in the single issue Nature that we've just talked about. And it's a really great way of doing the storytelling here, almost showing this partnership, this detective partnership, and how it's split, and how it's they're going down separate routes where they haven't told their other half, essentially. And that's a really interesting visual display of what's going on within the story.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really well done, and really, as the neck kind of tightens around Corrigan, he starts to get more and more brutal. In the past, he was very much, he's just making money out of this, and nobody will ever catch him, kind of thing. But as he feels, the investigation getting closer and closer to him, he essentially kidnaps Kenzie and starts to really brutally beat him to get the information out of him that he gave to Detective Allen.
There's a big reveal that Detective Kenzie is not as bad as we first thought from the story with Poison Ivy, and as would appear from the opening pages of this final story arc, because we find that he is actually Crispus's confidential informant. And one of the things as well on this is that Rennie kind of begins to realize that he is conducting his own private and personal investigation, and she finds this file on his desk.
Yeah.
She takes it to Esperanza. Esperanza says, "I never heard this."
Yeah.
Crispus, when he finds out that she's done this, when she confronts him about it, he says, "You shouldn't have touched that. You need to forget about this," because ultimately, both Rennie Montoya and Detective Esperanza in the Internal Affairs, they can't touch Corrigan. Corrigan knows this. He's been emboldened by the fact that anything that comes out of Internal Affairs, anything that maybe comes from Rene's personal dislike and hatred for him, is tainted by the fact that they've undermined their investigation, their own investigation. And you really see this descent of Corrigan. I'm not saying that he was ever neutral, because he was a corrupt cop and he was painted as a corrupt cop. But it seemed as though it was always being done for money on the side. And what you really get teased out within this final arc are the motives behind him. And they're much darker. He is essentially the head, it looks, of this group of patrol officers that are taking money, dealing drugs, corrupting evidence, selling evidence, all for money, all on the take, and all quite a tight-knit group. And he is squarely at the top of all of this.
Absolutely.
And they really begin to picture and show Corrigan as a real dark, dislikable character.
Oh, yeah.
And quite smarmy. It's really well done because you really turn against him, or I did anyway. I felt I really suddenly turned against Corrigan by the way he was drawn, by the way he behaved, and that he seemed to be a much more central villain in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just simply a corrupt cop that didn't harm anyone, but you really get to see that he will do anything to protect his turf.
Yeah, absolutely, and none more so than his treatment of Kenzie.
Yeah.
When he finds out that Kenzie's been given information to Alan, as I said, it's a scene that reminds me of something out of Hellraiser. You know, he's tied to the ceiling by chains and beaten to a bloody pulp, essentially. And Alan has to go and investigate this missing link, this missing informant.
Yeah, it's a very brutal scene. I mean, it looks he's chained up. Corrigan's got a wrench, and one of his informants saw Kenzie with Crispus Allen. He reports back to Corrigan, and this then spirals the entire story into a descent of violence and shock, really, for any reader who's been reading since issue 1.
Absolutely.
It's a really, really good and powerful end to a 40 issue series, but it's very bloody, and Kenzie is one of the first people to get the full brunt of how far Corrigan will go to protect his interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, the second person to take the brunt is Detective Crispus Allen.
Who's pulled into this trap to find his informant, Detective Kenzie, and is pulled into a trap with Corrigan's informants, the police officers, but ultimately with Corrigan delivering the fatal and multiple shots.
Yeah, 5 shots in the back, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's it really. I must admit, after reading the issue, I didn't want to pick up the next one for a little while. I gave it a little break. It was one of those moments when I flicked over the page and realized, Crispus Allen is dead. It's the end of his character, and I didn't really want to read much further for a little while. I had to give myself a little bit of a break, and that's just, to me, the power of this particular book. I think is really, really, really good. And they open issue 2 of Corrigan with probably what I think is probably the most powerful 4 or 5 pages that I've seen in this comic, definitely, and in this series, definitely. Which is it opens with black and white shots of the death of Crispus Allen with his eyes open on the ground, the reaction of Josie MacDonald sitting there looking at the dead body of one of the members of the MCU.
Yeah.
Maggie Sawyer going to a car and crying in silence, and then Captain Sawyer going and talking to Renee and breaking the news to her in the middle of the night about the death of her partner, all told with no speech bubbles, no information being passed on to the reader, but everything's being transferred through the panels.
Just in the panels, and it's really affecting. This is one half of a partnership that you have certainly coming in from issue 28, but even further back, throughout the whole of these issues, really. Crispus Allen, Rennie Montoya as a partnership have been there, and one of them has been lost in the line of duty, to one of his own who's corrupt. It's a real bitter taste, I think, that to happen.
Absolutely, it very much comes across that Renee's starting to see the error of her ways just around this time when Crispus gets killed. She's gone to Dee and apologized to her for everything that's happened, asking for forgiveness from her, but what's going through her head and what's really picked up is that if she had gotten control of this previously in the past, if she got control of her anger and her aggression and taking things personally, that herself and Crispus probably would have been working together on this, that she would have been there at the time, and it wouldn't have been essentially so easy to take out Crispus Allen if she was there. And it's a real kind of sad, somber note to end off this book.
Yeah, it is the mantra that they were stronger together, and they were able to do more than the sum of their individual parts when they worked together. And this shocks the MCU and the police department into action and investigation of the death of Crispus Allen.
Yeah.
But straight off the bat, Renee Montoya is under no illusion. And she imparts this quite frankly, to the rest of the MCU, that it was Corrigan who caused this. She shows the file and the case that he was building against Corrigan, and everyone in the MCU either knew he was corrupt, had suspicions that he was corrupt, and couldn't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they begin to build a case around the rounds that were found at the scene of the crime, and the gun that was used. And this is where the calculation of Corrigan comes in, and his malevolence, the planning that he went around it, because he used a handgun that could take a rifle round. And this leads to a situation where they think that they've got him. The net is ready. And Rennie warns them, this is what he wants you to think.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Joker in that sense.
Yeah.
He's planned this. He's got you to this point in time because they can't link the round to the gun, but they can link the gun to Corrigan. They know he had this gun. It was a modified Glock handgun. It's described as, but the round that is coming back is not this .224 that they all seem to think it is, this rifle round, but it's a .223. Now, I don't know anything about bullet rounds.
I was wondering, you sounded really confident.
No, I don't know anything about bullet rounds at all. I'm purely lifting that from the story. I have no idea, but this inconsistency means that they can't link the rounds that were fired from the gun to Corrigan, only the gun to Corrigan.
There's a couple of little bits about this. So firstly, I totally agree with you. Corrigan setting up his alibi is set up as if it's nothing. He's just setting it up like he would do it like he's done it 100 times before. Yeah. He just walks through and goes, right, these are the things I have to put in place to set myself apart, and no matter what, they're never going to find me. Secondly, the actual weapon was found by Josie McDowell. She stands on the other side of the room across from all 6 of the guns, and one of those guns calls out to her. So that was the second instance I was talking about, where she goes, there you are. It's just her line. And she looks across the room and goes, there you are. As in, it's spoken to me and told me, which I thought was quite interesting. But nothing was said about it at all. And finally, the mismatch between the weapon and the bullet is traced essentially to the fact that Corrigan must have paid off the person that was doing the matching. That essentially it would have been matched by anybody else if it hadn't been someone that was on Corrigan's payroll. And now that they've given him the opportunity to match the two of them, he's probably taken away the core of the weapon and replaced it with something that will never be matched, no matter where it's sent to now.
And Corrigan walks, him and his associate, I think it's Becky Mulcahy, they both walk after being brought in for questioning. And it's, I was like, it was drawn so smarmily where he walks out of the MCU with his arm around Becky as though they're about to go out on a date. Yeah. There is the suggestion that they get off on this sort of thing anyway, and are about to get off on this thing later on. But it is a stomach-churning kind of depiction of this character who has just done this to one of certainly my favourite characters from this entire series. Yeah. But it's really powerful because of that, and really affecting.
It's a really difficult kind of ending to this story. Really, it's you want to see your heroes triumph. You know, there's always that bit that's nagging in your head, knowing these writers and knowing what they've done over the course of these 40 issues. That you're kind of hoping maybe they'll discover something. Maybe they will take down Corrigan. They're not going to end it like that. They're not going to end the storyline like that. They're going to end it on a sore note, and it's really difficult to take that everybody in the MCU, from all the characters that you've dealt with over the course of the 40 issues, they all know it's Corrigan. It's definitely him that's done it, and there's nothing they can do, nothing within their power can track it to him. And he keeps, as you say, very smarmily, very cockily, he just keeps saying, well, prove it. If you think it's me, you prove it, you know?
Yeah. There are some little bits of hope that come through. Like, I love Captain Sawyer's response when, after he's just walked. And it's basically, okay, we go after the money that he used to pay off the forensic scientist. We find that link, and there must be some trace there. This idea, this is not over. He may have walked at this moment in time. We may have screwed up, but we need to now follow these links that we feel or are suspicious that he's done or know that he's done.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Rennie, this is a breaking point for her. She goes to Crispus Allen's wife's house after the funeral, outdoors. She's on the veranda of his house with one of his sons, and one of his sons just turns around and says, "I'm really sorry, Rennie, but I just can't stop thinking, why wasn't it you?
Mm-hmm.
Why weren't you there with him? He's so upset about his dad having gone and been shot." And she goes to the bar, gets drunk.
But you get the idea that question that the son is posing to Renee is exactly what she's been asking herself ever since she heard of the death of Crispus. Why wasn't it me? Why wasn't I there to help
Exactly.
him? Why wasn't I there to protect him? Much like, as we said, over the course of the previous 4 or 5 issues, she takes everything personally. She wants to be the one to save everybody and save everything that she's connected with. And this time, her partner, her closest person, even with Dee, there's a lot of relationship problems they've had over the last couple of months. Herself and Crispus, there haven't been that many. She just wants to save him, and she can't now.
But Dee is struggling with Rennie as much as Crispus was with regards to the violence. Yeah,
probably more so. Yeah.
And it leads to a breaking point, and Rennie storms over to Corrigan's apartment, batters down the door, knocks out Becky, and essentially faces Corrigan down with a gun to his head.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And she doesn't pull the trigger. In a moment of sweet justice, I think. The cowardice, the snivelliness of Corrigan is brought. It's just brought out where he just gets on his knees and is like, "Don't shoot me, please don't shoot me," and she doesn't. It's all teed up that she will come in and go blam and take him out and get revenge. And then maybe there's a little part of me that kind of wants that to happen. You want to see Corrigan get some form of comeuppance. And his comeuppance is that he's weak.
Yeah.
He's a coward. He's afraid when push comes to shove. And she leaves him to cry on the floor after holding his life in her hands.
Yeah.
The worst thing about it is that the well-placed lie that Corrigan did to get off from those initial questions by the MCU, it's too much for Rennie. She's lost her partner in the MCU, and she hands in her badge to Captain Sawyer along with her revolver.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and it kind of speaks all the way back to the issues with Harvey Bullock. Renee again has kind of proved that she is a stronger character than the Harvey Bullock character. She never turned on the person that killed her partner. She never killed Corrigan. She stepped back and said, "I'm out of this. It's driving me into something that I don't want to be. The city is too much. It's too corrupt. I can no longer be a police officer," which is the opposite decision that Harvey Bullock took. She got to that point before. It's explained. She got that point before when Gordon was shot, that she could have taken revenge for that at the time, and she didn't do it. Again, she's proven that she won't take that step.
She steps on the edge, and she doesn't step over that edge.
Exactly.
Into something probably worse, more akin to what Gotham Central, or how Gotham Central portrays Harvey Bullock. She steps back and wants to retain her moral centre, if for want of a better word. And I think she does.
Yeah.
And she walks out with her head held high as issue 40 comes to an end.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful ending to Gotham Central.
Yeah, absolutely. The series itself was set up, and they talked about it. Brubaker and Rucka talked about that. That it could be like a TV show. That they would set it up. They do arcs that were dealing with one half of the MCU who did the day shift, who were very well-known characters or relatively well-known characters, and then the night shift, which had different kind of characters. And it kind of set the whole series up as a TV show overall. How do you think they kind of fared with that?
I think they achieved it really well, and I think it's really positive, really encouraging signs for Gotham that's going to obviously premiere on the 22nd of September. I think you can do procedural and serialized elements That's what they've done here. And I think it comes back again and again to the quality of the writing. I mean, for me, the best stories were those involving much larger story arcs. Maybe they were 2, 3, or 4 issues long, like Soft Targets, like Half-Life, especially like Corrigan Part 2, Keystone Cops. I think because they're given time to breathe, they're allowed to expand, and you really get to understand motives, see development in character of those members of the MCU. That I loved. I think the single issue story arcs fared less well. I loved the one introducing Stacy, and I really enjoyed the one with Poison Ivy, Nature, and I think they were done really well. I think the problem with some of the single story arcs with Gotham Central as a whole was that they were linked to crossover events or tie-ins to crossover events, and you kind of get the idea that they're shoehorned in a bit. Certainly, Sunday Bloody Sunday, you have all this mystical stuff going on, which doesn't quite work in the context of what they're dealing with in the character development of Crispus Allen. I think that works well, but not the tie-in part. There's almost the context of it is missing, and it doesn't fit the context of Gotham Central and the issues before or the issues after.
Yeah, I agree. Even talking about that issue, Sunday Bloody Sunday, I think I found it quite difficult even talking about the possession of Rene Montoya by an extraterrestrial being almost. It seems like a weird thing to talk about when you're talking about the series Gotham Central. It seems totally incongruous of the storytelling so far. Overall, for me, the series has been fantastic. I almost can feel, as I read through it, it almost felt like 2 full seasons of a show. There was a Christmas episode with the Joker, the big moment. There's those, almost the sweep times when you get all the characters together investigating a huge moment. You get a whole cast of characters with all their own personalities. You get the really good arcs of the story that end out a season of the show, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The one thing that I absolutely, above everything else, the one thing I love is Corrigan Part 2 is an excellent storyline and features not even one reference to Batman, not one reference to his Batman villains. I didn't even notice it when I was reading through it at all. It's like as if it got to the end of the series and established what could have been a perfect series for another 5 or 6 years.
That concept of Gotham without the Batman, I think it's proven that it can work. Okay, Batman does appear occasionally in these, but for the most part, if not 98% of the time, he is absent from this world, and it works. I think you're also introduced to a host of really interesting characters. I think I speak for myself, but I think I also speak for Derek as well, in that of these members of the Major Crimes Unit in the police department, Rene Montoya, Crispus Allen, their dynamic is really well handled by the writing and by the artwork, and their interaction with Two-Face and with colleagues such as Corrigan. You have Harvey Bullock there, and the sort of interesting shades of grey that he brings and the complexities that he has with other members of the Major Crimes Unit and within himself. Yeah. And one of the things I really do hope is that the TV show Gotham will not only explore the villains and the origins of these villains that we all know and love, like the Penguin, and I can't wait for that, I really, really can't. But I think what Gotham Central has shown is that you can do that equally as well for members of the Gotham Police Department, not just Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock, but maybe some of the other characters in there as well. Yeah. It would be great if Corrigan was there, actually. But we still have the potential that we could see a Josie McDonald, a Marcus Driver. There's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, I was going to say, though, if we saw Corrigan on Gotham, on the TV show, it would just throw up a red flag to anybody, any of our listeners who've listened to all of our podcasts, and anybody who's read these comics. If you see Jimmy Corrigan appear on Gotham, you'll instantly go, oh, when's he going to kill the character, or when's he gonna turn on them? He's the bad guy. So I like the idea that there could be another corrupt cop that we don't know just yet. There could be another corrupt cop in the show that could have the same path as Corrigan. It doesn't necessarily need to be him. But really good book.
Yeah, I think last for me as well is that it does show that Gotham will be able to use the villains that we know from Batman films, from Batman comics, and involve them with the police department without the need of the Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really good. And I think also, despite what's been said, that there is the possibility, whether they take it or not is another matter entirely, but there is the possibility and potential for crossovers with The Flash, with Arrow, with Constantine, through the police departments or villains or prisons within those other DC cities and universes.
Absolutely. After meeting Stacey, I think that Felicity from Arrow could come over and work in their offices for a little while in the GCPD office.
I'd love to see a Stacey on the show, for example. It would be great.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, that's our coverage of Gotham Central. It's been a long series, but really good fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been really good fun, and it's really interesting to know that cast members of Gotham were given this whole series to look at. I don't know whether the writers did. Certainly, we've heard that they're also going to create their own thing.
Absolutely.
But they have looked at this, and I think that's encouraging. I think that's bodes really well, and we're glad to have shared our thoughts on this series.
Yeah, I suppose my kind of closing thought on this is, don't get me wrong. Anyway, I do not want to see this specific set of graphic novels turned into the TV show Gotham.
Absolutely.
It's not what I want at all. I really enjoyed spending time with the characters, and I'd love if they just took some of those characteristics into the show Gotham. It's really, if I've enjoyed it on the page, I know I'm going to enjoy it on the screen.
It's the flavour and the tone to go with what they're creating would be amazing. It isn't to repeat it verbatim. I completely agree with Derek on that. But we hope you've really enjoyed listening to our thoughts on some of these characters and some of these storylines. I want to thank you definitely for listening to Gotham Central, and for everyone, Gotham's getting that little bit closer. We're coming into September now, and there's only a few more weeks left till the start.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to send us any feedback on Gotham Central, if you've been reading along with us or have been listening to our podcasts, and hopefully you haven't ruined what is a brilliant story, and I'd recommend anybody going down to the local comic book shop and picking it up. But send in your feedback to us on GothamTVPodcast@gmail.com.
Yep. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Flickr, all with the handles of Gotham TV Podcast. So just search through them, and you should be able to find us. If you want to leave any feedback or any reviews for us on any of those sites, or indeed on iTunes or Stitcher, please feel free to do so.
So you might be wondering what we're doing for our next episode, because we haven't said yet.
I'm wondering.
We can't actually tell you. We've got a couple of kind of... It's a secret. There is a little secret episode that's coming up very soon, before the launch of Gotham in the US, which is about 3 weeks away as we record this. So there'll be another episode definitely released before the launch of Gotham. And I think we might even have 2 that are coming up, but they're quite secret, but they're quite cool. Yeah. Hopefully you're going to like it as much as we're looking forward to it, I suppose. Thanks as always for the feedback, and thanks as always for getting in contact. Really good to hear from all of you, and really good to know we've got listeners that are enjoying this and as excited about the show as we are.
Definitely. Thank you very much for listening, and we can't wait to be back with our next few episodes.
However dark and scary the world might be right now, there will be light. There will be light. Brooks.
That Jim Gordon is ex-military. He's come from the army. It is the idea that he was actually born in Gotham. It's not, I know from Batman Year One, he is coming from Chicago. You don't get the sense of whether he was born and brought up in Gotham.
Must have got that accent in Butler Training School. He must have got his British accent in Butler Training School then, obviously.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about Jim Gordon. I'm not Alfred.
Oh dear.
I want to know your source, and there becomes a real standoff between these two because for Lipman,
That superhero Lipman. Yeah.
up and but there's a real standoff between Sawyer and Lipman, because for Lipman it's a real point of principle. I can't give you my sources at all. Mustard, peppercorn, sorry. I can't get over Lipman. As opposed to Nose Man.
Oh dear.
Béarnaise sauce. For him, it's a real point of principle, because he doesn't want to give away his sources.
Oh no.
For him, it's a real point of principle that he doesn't want to give away his sources. Or red wine shoe. I can't get over this.
In the meantime, Robin actually turns up, doesn't he? He comes back from Bloodhaven and goes and meets our friend Stacy.
Yeah, little Stacy on top.
On top of the roof, yeah. Stacy.
Or
on top.
Robin. With the Mighty Mints man doing his stuff, and